Can't you even afford a real lawyer, Emma? My mother's laughter echoed through the courtroom as her attorney smiled beside her. Everyone turned toward me as if they were watching a woman walk into a fight she had already lost. My name is Emma Carter. At 35 years old, I stood alone at the defense table while my mother sat across from me surrounded by expensive lawyers, polished documents, and the confidence of someone who believed the verdict was already hers. She looked at my empty chair and smiled. You should have brought someone who actually knows what they're doing. Her attorney chuckled under his breath. Even the people sitting behind my mother seemed amused. The judge looked at me carefully and asked, Mrs. Carter, are you certain you wish to represent yourself? I stood straight and answered, Yes, Your Honor. My mother leaned back with a satisfied smile. She thought my empty chair meant I was broke. She thought my silence meant I was frightened. She thought I had walked into that courtroom with nothing. She couldn't have been more wrong. The judge turned toward my mother's attorney. You may proceed. He stood confidently and began explaining why my mother should receive complete control over my late father's estate. He described me as inexperienced, emotional, and incapable of managing complicated financial matters. Every sentence was designed to make me look smaller. I didn't interrupt him. I simply kept one hand resting on the leather folder in front of me. My mother noticed it. What's in there? She whispered. I looked at her but said nothing. She smiled again. She believed it was probably another desperate collection of papers that wouldn't survive 5 minutes against her legal team. What she didn't know was that the folder contained information she had spent nearly a year trying to keep hidden. 11 months earlier, my father had died unexpectedly. He left behind a successful construction company, several commercial properties, investment accounts, and a family trust that had been created to protect everything he had built. My mother immediately took control of the estate. She told me she was only doing what my father would have wanted. I trusted her. She was my mother and I was grieving. But then strange things started happening. A property that had belonged to my father suddenly appeared under a company I had never heard of. Money began moving between accounts. Documents appeared with signatures I didn't recognize. Whenever I asked questions, my mother became defensive. Emma, you're not qualified to understand these things, she would say. Let the professionals handle it. I tried to believe her until I found a property transfer worth several $million. The buyer was a company created only 3 weeks after my father's death. The director was one of my mother's closest financial advisors. I asked my mother about it. She laughed in my face. You really think you can investigate me, she said. You don't even have a lawyer. That sentence stayed with me. Instead of arguing, I started looking deeper. I collected every public record I could find. I compared property documents. I traced corporate registrations. I reviewed financial statements and transaction dates. Slowly, a pattern appeared. The money wasn't disappearing randomly. It was being moved through companies connected to my mother. Then I discovered something even worse. A document had been submitted claiming my father had changed his trust shortly before his death. The new version gave my mother almost complete control and removed me from the position my father had originally given me. I knew something was wrong immediately. My father had never mentioned changing the trust. More importantly, the signature didn't look like his. When I confronted my mother, she didn't deny it. She simply told me I had no chance of proving anything. 2 weeks later, she filed the lawsuit that brought us into this courtroom. Her lawyers requested that the judge permanently remove me from the family trust and transfer the disputed properties under my mother's control. They arrived with thick binders and expert witnesses. I arrived with one folder. My mother thought that comparison was the entire story. It wasn't. The judge looked toward me again. Mrs. Carter, do you have any evidence you wish to submit? I placed my hand on the folder. My mother's attorney smiled. He clearly expected me to struggle. I slowly stood. Yes, Your Honor. The courtroom became quiet. I looked directly at my mother. But before I submit it, there's something everyone in this room needs to understand. My mother crossed her arms. "Here we go," she whispered. I opened the folder and removed a single document. "My mother believes I came here because I couldn't afford an attorney." Pause. "She believes that makes me powerless." I placed the document before the judge. My mother leaned forward. The confidence in her face began to disappear. I looked at her and said, "She has no idea who I'm." The courtroom went completely silent. My mother stared at me, waiting for me to finish the sentence. Her attorney glanced at her, then back at me. The judge reached for the document I had placed on his desk. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "you may continue." I didn't rush. I wanted my mother to feel the same uncertainty she had made me feel for almost a year. "Your Honor," I said, "my mother believes I am here because I couldn't afford a lawyer. The truth is, I didn't need one for the first part of this case." Her attorney immediately objected. "Your Honor, this is irrelevant." The judge raised his hand. "I'll decide what is relevant." I turned the document toward him. "This is the original trust agreement my father signed 3 years before his death." The judge examined it carefully. My mother shook her head. "That's not the final version." I looked at her. "You're right. It isn't the version you filed." Her face changed. Her attorney leaned toward her. "Victoria, don't say anything." She ignored him. "Emma, where did you get that?" I answered calmly. "From the original records your lawyers never requested." The judge compared the document with the version submitted by my mother. "There are substantial differences." He nodded. "The original names me as successor trustee. The version my mother submitted removes me completely." My mother immediately spoke. "Your Honor, my husband changed it before he died." I placed another document on the desk. "Then you should be able to explain this." It was a certified hospital record showing that my father was unconscious and heavily sedated on the date the new trust document was supposedly signed. The courtroom became silent again. My mother's attorney stood. "We object to the medical record." The judge looked at him. "On what basis?" He hesitated. "We need time to authenticate it." I calmly replied, "It has already been certified by the hospital." The judge read the certification and then looked at my mother. "Mrs. Carter, did your husband personally sign this amendment?" My mother opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Finally she said, "He authorized it." "Where is that authorization?" the judge asked. Her attorney began searching through his files. Waited. The judge's expression became increasingly serious. "Counsel," he said, "do you have the authorization?" The attorney slowly closed his folder. "Not with us today." I almost smiled. "Because it doesn't exist." My mother looked at me sharply. "You don't know that." I placed another document before the judge. "Yes, I do." It was a forensic signature report. My father's verified signature had been compared with the signature on the disputed trust amendment. The examiner's conclusion was clear. The signature was not genuine. My mother's face went pale. Her attorney stopped speaking. The judge leaned forward. "Where did you obtain this examination?" I answered, "From an independent forensic examiner I hired months ago." My mother suddenly laughed nervously. "You hired an investigator?" I looked at her. "I did." She shook her head. "With what money?" I answered, "My own." Then I placed another file on the table. "And that's not the only document I had examined." The judge looked at me. "What else?" I turned to the next page. "The property transfers." My mother's expression changed again. I explained that 3 commercial properties had been transferred from my father's estate into companies connected to her financial advisor. The transfers were made for amounts far below their actual market value. The money then moved through several accounts before eventually returning to an account controlled by my mother. Her attorney objected again, but this time his voice wasn't confident. Those were legitimate business transactions. I looked at him. Then why were the receiving companies created after my father's death? He didn't answer. The judge looked at the corporate registration dates. One by one, the dates matched the pattern I had discovered. My mother shifted nervously in her chair. She leaned toward me. "Emma, we can still fix this." I shook my head. "You had 11 months to fix it," she whispered. "You're destroying your own family." I answered. "You started destroying it when you thought nobody would ever find out." The judge ordered the disputed documents preserved and instructed the clerk to mark the financial records for further review. My mother's confidence was disappearing, but she still had one advantage. Her lawyers had controlled the courtroom narrative from the beginning. They were ready with another argument. Her lead attorney stood and said, "Your Honor, even if there are irregularities in certain documents, my client still has legitimate authority over the estate." I looked at him. "That's not true." He turned toward me. "And how exactly would you know?" I slowly closed my folder. "Because I have the document that proves who actually has authority." The judge looked at me. "Mrs. Carter, what document are you referring to?" I reached into the folder and pulled out a sealed envelope bearing my father's handwriting. My mother saw it and immediately froze. Her lips moved silently. "No." I looked directly at her. "You recognize it." She stood suddenly. "Emma, don't open that." The courtroom turned toward her. The judge's voice became firm. "Mrs. Carter, sit down." She slowly sat. I placed the envelope in front of the judge. "Your Honor, my father left this document specifically to prevent what is happening today." The judge looked at the envelope. Then he looked at my mother. "Mrs. Carter, I suggest you explain why you're afraid of that document." My mother said nothing. I opened my folder again and finally revealed the truth behind my unfinished sentence. "Because I looked at the judge. The person my father appointed to independently investigate his estate." My mother's face went completely pale. But that was only the beginning. The evidence inside that envelope was about to reveal something far bigger than a forged signature. The judge slowly opened the envelope while my mother sat motionless across the courtroom. Her attorney leaned forward, trying to see what was inside, but the judge immediately told him to remain seated. The first page was a letter written in my father's handwriting. The judge read it silently. Then his expression changed. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "did you know your husband prepared this document?" My mother shook her head. No, her voice was barely audible. I watched her carefully. For the first time since I had entered that courtroom, she looked genuinely afraid. My father had written the letter 8 months before his death. In it, he explained that he had become concerned about unexplained financial activity inside his company. He had discovered payments going to businesses he did not recognize and property discussions taking place without his approval. More importantly, he had instructed an independent investigator to monitor those transactions. The judge looked at me. "And you received this file when?" I answered, 3 months after my father's death." My mother immediately interrupted. "That's impossible. I had access to all of his records." I turned toward her. "Not all of them." I placed another document beside the letter. My father kept a separate digital archive outside the company's main system. Her attorney stood. "Your Honor, we have no reason to believe these records are authentic." I looked at him. "Then let's verify them." The judge ordered the clerk to examine the certification attached to the files. While they were doing that, I opened another section of my folder. The investigator traced more than $4 million in transfers during the first 7 months after my father's death. My mother stared at me. "That's a lie." I placed the banking records before the judge. "The money moved through 4 companies." Pointed to the first. "This one was controlled by your financial advisor." Then the second. "This one was registered to his business partner." Then the third. "And this one was controlled by a trust created in your name." My mother's attorney immediately objected. Those transactions were legitimate estate expenses. I looked at him. Then why was the money moved through companies that had no business relationship with my father's construction company? He had no answer. The judge examined the records carefully. Counsel, I want an explanation. The attorney looked toward my mother. She shook her head. I don't know. I quietly said. You do. My mother looked at me. You think you know everything because you found a few documents. I shook my head. I didn't find a few documents. Open the next file. I found the emails. Her expression changed instantly. The investigator had recovered deleted communications from a backup system. One message was between my mother and her financial advisor. It discussed moving assets before I could obtain control of the trust. Another message referred to me as the daughter, and discussed how to make it appear that I had voluntarily surrendered my interest in the estate. The judge read the messages twice. My mother's attorney stopped objecting. He simply stared at the pages. I could feel the entire courtroom turning against the woman who had entered that room, convinced she controlled the story. The judge looked at my mother. Did you send these communications? She shook her head. No, I placed the forensic report beside them. The email accounts were authenticated. Her attorney finally spoke. Your Honor, even if these communications are genuine, they don't prove criminal intent. I looked at him. Then let's look at what happened immediately after the messages were sent. I presented the property records. The commercial property discussed in the email had been transferred 48 hours later. My mother had authorized the transfer. The receiving company was connected to her advisor, and the purchase price was less than 1/3 of the property's documented market value. The judge leaned back in his chair. Mrs. Carter, why was this property sold for such a low amount? My mother began crying. I was trying to protect the estate. I answered quietly. You weren't protecting it. You were moving it. She looked at me. You don't understand what I was dealing with. Then tell the judge. She couldn't. Her attorney whispered that she should remain silent. The judge ordered that all disputed assets remain frozen until a complete forensic review could be conducted. But then my mother suddenly said something that made everyone stop. There is another account. I turned toward her. She looked at me through tear-filled eyes. Your father had another account, Emma. You don't know about it. The judge immediately asked. Where? My mother hesitated. Overseas. Her attorney looked shocked. Victoria, don't. She ignored him. Your father kept money there because he didn't trust anyone with it. I looked at her. How much? She swallowed. Almost $7 million. The courtroom erupted in whispers. I had spent months tracing millions of dollars, but I had never found this account. The judge demanded the account information. My mother gave him the name of the investment institution. I recognized it immediately. It was the same institution my father had once mentioned to me when I was younger. I thought it had been nothing more than a business relationship. Now I understood why my mother had been so desperate to control the estate. She wasn't only trying to take the properties. She had been trying to reach money my father had deliberately kept outside her control. I turned toward my mother. You knew about that account the entire time. She nodded slowly. Yes. And you never told the court. She looked down. No, the judge's expression hardened. Mrs. Carter, withholding an asset of this magnitude from an estate proceeding is extremely serious. My mother started crying. I needed the money. I asked. For what? She finally admitted that she had accumulated enormous personal debts after several investments failed. She had been using money from my father's company to cover those losses. When I discovered the transfers, she panicked and tried to remove me from the trust before I could investigate further. The courtroom became silent. Suddenly everything connected. The forged trust amendment, the property transfers, the hidden companies, the missing money, the emails, the secret account. My mother had spent 11 months building a story in which she was the victim and I was the greedy daughter. But the evidence had created a completely different story. The judge looked at M. Mrs. Carter, do you have anything else? I looked down at my folder. There was one final document I had not shown anyone. My mother noticed it. Her eyes widened. Emma, she whispered. Please don't. I slowly placed the document on the judge's desk. Your Honor, this is the document that explains why my father knew this would happen. The judge read the first line. His expression changed immediately. He looked toward my mother and said, Mrs. Carter, I strongly recommend that you listen carefully to what I am about to read. My mother lowered her head. She already knew what was coming. And for the first time, I realized that my father hadn't simply left me an inheritance. He had left me a final protection against the person sitting across from me. The judge continued reading the final document while my mother sat completely still. Her attorney had stopped taking notes. He simply stared at the papers in front of him, as if he already understood what the document meant. After several seconds, Judge Harrison looked up. Mrs. Carter, this document was executed by your husband 6 months before his death. My mother slowly shook her head. I never saw that. The judge continued. It establishes a separate protected trust and names Emma Carter as the successor trustee. My mother looked at me. No, I said nothing. The judge turned another page. It also states that if any beneficiary attempts to conceal, transfer, or misappropriate estate assets, their authority over the estate immediately terminates. My mother's face became completely pale. She finally understood why I had remained calm throughout the hearing. My father had anticipated the exact situation she had created. The judge looked at me. Mrs. Carter, when did you receive this document? I answered. After I turned 35. My father instructed the trustee to release it to me on my 35th birthday if any dispute concerning his estate existed. My mother stared at me in disbelief. You waited until now? He nodded. Because I didn't want to accuse you without proof. Her eyes filled with tears. Emma, I was your mother. I looked at her. And I wanted to believe you. The judge placed the document beside the other evidence. Based on the evidence presented today, this court finds substantial grounds to question the validity of the trust amendment submitted by Mrs. Carter and the transactions connected to the disputed properties. My mother's attorney immediately stood. Your Honor, we request a continuance. The judge looked at him. For what purpose? He hesitated. To review the newly submitted evidence. The judge's expression hardened. You requested emergency control over millions of dollars based on documents that are now under serious question. You had an opportunity to investigate those documents before filing. The attorney slowly sat down. My mother looked toward me. Please. We can fix this. I shook my head. You had months to fix it. She wiped her tears. I was scared. I answered quietly. So was I. The judge then issued his orders. My mother's petition was dismissed. Her temporary control over the estate was terminated. All disputed properties and accounts were placed under the protection of the family trust. The hidden investment account was ordered to be disclosed and preserved. The questionable transactions were referred for a complete forensic investigation. The forged documents and suspicious transfers were also turned over for further review. My mother sat motionless as the reality finally reached her. The same woman who had laughed at me less than an hour earlier was now watching everything she had tried to control slip away. Her expensive lawyers could no longer protect the story she had created because the evidence had destroyed it. As the courtroom began to empty, my mother remained in her chair. I gathered my leather folder and started walking toward the doors. Emma! Stop. Her voice was different now. There was no arrogance left. Please don't leave like this. I turned around. How should I leave? She looked down. Like my daughter. I stared at her for several seconds. I was your daughter when you filed that petition. I was your daughter when you told the court I was incapable. I was your daughter when you tried to remove me from Dad's trust. You didn't protect me then. She began crying. I thought I could fix everything. I replied. You kept making it worse. She looked at me. Do you hate me? I shook my head. No. But I won't let being your daughter become an excuse for what you did. She lowered her head. I walked toward the courtroom doors, then stopped one final time. "Mom," she looked up. "You kept asking why I represented myself." I held up the leather folder. "This is why." I walked out before she could answer. Outside the courthouse, the afternoon sunlight hit my face, and for the first time in almost a year, I felt like I could breathe again. My father's company was protected. His properties were no longer being secretly transferred. The trust was secure. And the evidence my mother had tried to bury was now part of the official record. Months later, the investigation uncovered even more financial irregularities, and the assets that had been moved through the hidden companies were traced and recovered. The money in the protected account remained untouched, exactly as my father had intended. I eventually took responsibility for managing the trust, not because I wanted control over my father's fortune, but because I wanted to protect the legacy he had spent his life building. I also restored funding to the community program my father had created years earlier. One afternoon, I returned to the courthouse for the final hearing. I stood in the same courtroom where my mother had once laughed because I had no lawyer beside me. The judge recognized me immediately. He asked if I had anything to add before the case was officially closed. I looked at the empty chair where I had sat alone months earlier. Then I smiled. "No, Your Honor. My father's wishes have been honored." The judge nodded. I walked out carrying the same leather folder. It was still worn, still simple, but it had become a reminder of the day everyone thought I was powerless. My mother had looked at an empty chair and assumed it meant weakness. She had mistaken silence for fear. She had mistaken preparation for desperation. And most importantly, she had mistaken her daughter for someone who would never fight back. She had laughed when I represented myself because she thought I had nothing. She never realized that I had walked into that courtroom carrying something far more powerful than an expensive lawyer: the truth.